Okay, I'm sitting here with Dr. Scott. We're discussing Superman. Now, we've had a look at the birth of Superman, and I'm just going to lift the camera up. As again, you can see this up on the screen. This is the death of Superman. Now, they'll be able to go and look at this. They won't be able to see it off this clip.
Yeah.
But could you look at that and describe to us what we're looking at?
Yeah. Okay. So this is don't worry, he comes back to life again. But this is the death of Superman. So the mid 90s or early 90s, rather. This is 1992. They've become sort of colloquially known as the dark age of comics. Now, there's lots of reasons for this. One reason is there was a huge kind of speculator boom. So basically, corporations took over the comic book companies, and they realised they could make a shitload of money by licensing the characters. But also what happened is, because of that, these companies started going, these are huge collector items. So suddenly people who didn't really read comics were going into comic shops, and the companies they would publish like an issue one, and they would say this is a collector's item, and they would give it a special, like a foil holographic cover. And they were all pretty gaudy. Really, like the style of those comics was very. I mean, you get a kind of an idea from there, but very far removed from the kind of very simple style of the 1930s. Very kind of busy style, a kind of grittier, in theory, kind of feel to it. So in some ways, the death of Superman story is the kind of culmination of these ideas. So we'll sell a load of comics because we'll kill Superman.
You said it's the noir period because of what's going on in the financial world. Does this also tie, because around that time cinema goes quite dark?
Yeah, we're coming off the back of the first Tim Burton's Batman movie in 1989 that came out as well. So two things happen. The Batman movie is very important in terms of its influence, but also in the mid-80s, Watchmen is published, Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. So there's a brief kind of flurry of popular interest, this kind of notion that superheroes, they're not just for kids anymore. Whereas obviously that's problematic, because the assumption is that they were for kids in the first place. I would question that. But what does happen off the back of that, Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns are both clear-cut masterpieces. There's not a lot of debate on that. But the effect that it has on comics is that suddenly people go, we're going to do mature comics. But they're not as clever as Frank Miller and Alan Moore, who did Watchmen and Dark Knight. So actually what they do is they take the violence, they take the rape scenes, for example, and they shove those into their superhero comics under the guise or the illusion that this is somehow gritty and grown up. Whereas the reality very often was that it was gratuitous and exploitative, not good comics. The death of Superman sold a lot of comics, huge amounts of comics, got a lot of publicity in the mainstream media. Looking at it now, 20 years later, not a good storyline. Badly written, generally very badly drawn. But important in terms of the history. The other reason I chose this one is because this is a rip-off of Michelangelo's statue of
That's a fantastic
Pieta.
reference for us. Can I see it again? And we're going to get that in there in the links, we can go and look it up.
Yeah, which is a statue of Mary cradling the dead Christ basically after the Passion. It looks like this. This is a very direct reference. Superman, a lot of people have pointed out that superheroes generally, the argument goes, are a kind of modern mythology. Superman in particular has got very real ties to, his creators were Jewish, so there are very real ties to Judaism. For example, you can read Superman as a variation on the story of Moses. If you like, the last son is sent to earth to be saved. But it's also a variation on the Christ theme, so a God, a father in the sky sends his only son to save the humans of earth.
Sticking with the Judeo thing rather than Judeo-Christian, a big thing about Moses is he never gets to the promised land. Now, Superman's dying here. I just popped it over again. But you say he comes back to life.
He does come back to life. Because that's the other thing, he is a sun god. So in terms of classical mythology, sun gods, Odin, for example, is a good example of a sun god. But also there are lots of people who would argue that actually Christ is just an extension of that mythology.
Right, so this is the Norse saga with Odin?
I'm trying to think.
There's the Egyptian.
Osiris,
Yeah.
I guess, is the equivalent in the Egyptian pantheon. I'm trying to think of the Greek equivalent. Who's the god? Sol, I think, is the god of the sun in the Greek pantheon. But they're all very similar in as much as they derive, they're related to the sun, so they derive some kind of power from the sun, which is where Superman's powers come from. He's got an alien biology that gets superpowers from Earth's yellow sun.
From our yellow sun.
So he's very much kind of linked to the sun in that sense. And also all of those gods, all of those mythologies, they tend to die and get reborn. Now that's a very common trope in superhero comics, not limited to Superman. Death is a revolving door.
It's very interesting for us. So any of the students watching this, we'll make sure that we have a link through with some of the artwork that we've got from some of those cultures, whatever we can find.
Yeah, and certainly the Michelangelo thing could not be more explicit. I chose this one. If you look at any comics, you will find crucifixion poses are very common. It's a very common trope, sort of superheroes descending from the sky with their arms outstretched. So yeah, often very explicit.
Thank you very much.
No problem.